She did this to herself. No one made her go after that vessel. No one thought the derelict was salvageable anyways. But she couldn't resist the biggest haul in the system for anyone that was crazy enough to go after it. Stubborn and greedy was how her crew would describe her. Intolerable was another. Most of them had no other alternatives for making coin. They all had rap sheets as long as those textbooks that everyone back on Earth stopped reading centuries ago. Yeah, I met Bonnie seemingly by chance when I was looking for a drop-off ship to take me to Port Destiny, just on the cusp of the 7th zone of the Kuiper belt, near Arakoth. You know it, friend? Yeah, hellish place for sure, but I had some business there that couldn't be missed. A new lucrative opportunity that would have taken me out of this damned solar system for good. She understood that drive, so she had no problem taking me on board the Queen's loot. We were on the same frequency, her and I. Made out of the same stuff. Divided by trade, but of sole understanding about what a girl can do in these wretched parts of the universe to get some kind of life outside of the domestic. And just between us friends, I think she wanted in on my deal. She had no chance, though. I trade with extrasolar mercs from the shadow zone beyond Planet 9. None of this Earth dreck. And Bonnie was Earth through and through. I loved her for it. They wouldn't have. Our first parlay was in her quarters on the Queen. She was docked just on top of this bar, actually. Gave her crew a little shore leave to let out some steam on the party rings of Neptune before taking it upon themselves to venture into the most treacherous part of the belt. Bonnie had a thing for danger. Longing for it, she would say. You could see it plastered all over her captain's quarters, in fact. Tapestries from the peoples of Phobos that even Mars Prime didn't dare touch. A jagged tooth from the Leviathan Europae hunted by herself in the depths of Europa. You know, she told me it was the last of its kind that she found and murdered in coldness of those dark waters. The last vestige of a magnificent being with a history older than that of Homo sapiens now stood perched on her desk to hold in place paper books that she would never read. However, I'm not sure what she wanted to convince me of that day. I knew about the potential value of the ship, that ancient galley that had managed to lodge itself in an asteroid eons ago. But that wasn't the booty I was after. As I said, I had my own thing going, and that one, unlike this salvage job, was a sure thing. Come on, she said. Ain't you the least bit curious? You might find vintage weapons that I'm sure would sell at a top price among your lot. I'm just looking for a ride, that's all. Well, this particular ride doesn't take direct courses unless there's a handsome prize waiting at the other end. You either hop on board and join us at Deathrock first, or you find alternative means of transportation. She grinned. She was well aware no respectable ship would have taken me on without asking too many questions. 5 days after that chat, and a few bottles of the finest single malt a buccaneer could loot, we were off to find the legendary ship, to plunder its ancient treasures more so than resolve its enigmatic past. Yeah, it was an adventure my gut wasn't too keen on taking. But before I knew it, I had become a commuter on a dirty pirate vessel posing as a salvage ship, plunging its way into the densest parts of the Kuiper belt. I mean, not even automated map-maker ships have roamed so far and deep into that zone. Whether it was the tight crawl through the asteroids that stopped them, or the presence of that derelict, is anybody's guess. I should say I've known many brave souls who dared not come across close to Deathrock because of its powerful presence there. It had laid untouched since its discovery in the late 22nd century, as I'm sure you're aware of, friend. Yeah, took almost an Earth year to arrive on location, and one more half to creep through the asteroids and cosmic dust. The Queen's direct fusion drive was old school and needed a little nudge every now and again just to get us moving along at a smidgen of impulse speed. I'd like to say it was good times with the crew, but apart from Bonnie, the only other voice I could stand listening to was that of Mr. Wayfinder. Strange fellow with an even stranger attitude toward life. But best pilot I've seen navigating the belt, though. The third person worth mentioning was the ship's engineer. The one soul on board that I couldn't place there in my wildest dreams. The one soul whose demise I actually find tragic. Young, smart, and sweet, Mila sure seemed like her life had turned in a nasty direction when she found herself among these people. And eventually me. Peep and Creep were the embodiment of their names. That was all there was to them. "Well, would you look at that beauty?" Bonnie said when the derelict was finally visible from the grimy porthole of the Queen's loot. "Yeah, seems like she's been through a lot, but I like my gals with battle scars. Gives them character." She turned to me and smiled. Soon as I saw the derelict ship while we were crawling toward it through ancient debris of what might have become a gargantuan planet, I realized the legends they had never done it justice. It was a thing of such alien proportions and design that even my mercs would find chilling in their part of the Milky Way. It had taken a beating, all right. Pressed up and meshed into the asteroid it collided with in bygone days. Fused with it through ice and metal until the eye became no longer sure it was looking upon two different objects from two different parts of the universe. Yikes, poor crew. Thrice the size of the asteroid, the broken down craft looked like a gaping space monstrosity that was trying to devour the piece of space rock. Collision upon collision was evident on its ancient hull, which barely stood the passage of time within the hellscape it had found itself stopped in its intergalactic journey. "What a wonder!" What a beast, I found myself muttering in response to Bonnie's excitement. The ship might have been made entirely out of gold as far as she was concerned, but by the look of the relic, it would have been more lucrative for her and the crew to mine the asteroid it was spliced with than plunder the worn-down thing. The closer we got to the craft, the more stupendous the sight. Truth be told, I felt a little shake in my bones, a little shiver down my spine. And I don't scare easily, friend. It was awful, yet magnificent. I couldn't help but wonder what creatures had roamed in its interior. What phantoms had now possessed this ghost ship, stranded so far from home. Thankfully, also far from any decent, livable planet in this dreadful system. "Glad you came along?" Bonnie whispered in my ear smugly, thinking I shared her joy. My response was null. I had other plans, as I've mentioned. While the captain and her crew were getting ready to dock the Queen's loot as close to the abandoned relic as they could, I had time to stare at it. And stare at it. And stare at it. Uh, it, I stared at it until it felt like nothing else in the universe existed. It's difficult to describe the scene. I moved from porthole to porthole to porthole to see to just look at it as we were getting closer. At times and from different sides, it almost looked like it had been growing out of the side of the asteroid. Metal roots sprang out and in, over and throughout. The two space things, one artificial and the other the product of nature, were taking each other over completely. Then again, when we would shift around, it looked like the vessel was made of liquid metal that was being poured on top of the rock continuously and forming the shape of a spherical bubble ready to pop. I wasn't sure if I wanted to see the ship up close and personal, or if I wanted to bolt out of there and find my way back here in an escape pod eventually. But Bonnie made that decision for me. After all, she was the captain, and I a mere patron upon her ship. Peep and Creep were the first ones to step foot on the vessel. Apt, since they were no more than the muscle on board. The Queen only needed a navigator and an engineer if something were to happen to the rest. The former more than the latter, so Mr. Wayfinder was staying put with the three of us back where it was safe and sound, even if a little snug. Those idiots were moving toward the eyesore latched on the asteroid like two little flies approaching a dung heap until they disappeared into it fully. They found their way inside the ship through a massive collision hole on its side. Needless to tell you, friend, that was the first time in a year and a half in which I was actually interested in what any one of those two had to say. Thankfully, we also had cameras mounted on their suits, so we could witness the interior of the ship as if we were there and not just rely on their dull descriptions. But the feed was dark. We could only hear their heavy, strained breathing intermingled with your basic EVA chatter. Nothing was moving at first. Nothing was showing up on the screens back at the Queen. Bonnie was fuming. Infrared, turn off the thermal vision additions. Are you daft? There's nothing alive in there. She screamed into the two-way stream. Suddenly, at the literal press of a button, we were witnessing a sight that no one had gazed upon for over God knows how many centuries, if not millennia. Granted, it was in black and white since Bonnie was too stingy to invest in anything more high-tech than your average Joe could afford. However, it still stopped the breath and quickened the pulse, if you get my meaning. The Queen's lute was silent for the first time since I had boarded her. Creep was moving front with Peep following behind. I'll tell ya, part of me began to wish I'd seen that ship in its glory days as her feed was coming in on the main screen. My eyes darted between the two feeds as I tried catching bits and pieces that weren't present in both. But in my mind's eye, the vision of the ship was piecing together like a puzzle. These aliens weren't playing around when they built this thing. My limited understanding, cleared up a little by Mr. Wayfinder's expertise, told me that the vessel might have been a scout, made to perfection to enjoy the full efficiency of the level of tech it was made with. A level of tech we still haven't reached in these parts of the galaxy, friend. How it got to its miserable end with that kind of make is as tragic as the eventual death of the universe, but so it goes, as they say. The interior of the ship was vast and open. Nothing like the Queen. Nothing like anything I've seen, and I've hitched many rides with all sorts. These beings were either giants or moved around with ease without the need for mock gravity harnesses like meager folk on this side of the belt. Or the Oort cloud, honestly. There was nothing at first to tell us who they were and what they even looked like. Either time had erased them completely, or they had just jumped ship before they got stranded. Hell, Peep and Creep weren't even sure if they were floating in the bow or the stern of the ship. There were no indications of what used to be up and down for these beings either. Mila and Mr. Wayfinder were amazed by the sight, gaping alongside me at the feeds, waiting for each new sector of the ship that would present itself to our vanguard. I guess the thieving parts of their brains had switched off, unlike Bonnie's, who was getting restless and angry because her two goons weren't finding anything that seemed worth looting. I bet in those silent moments, she had started scheming how to actually salvage the entire ship and not just grab at whatever was at hand in her usual way. I don't have to tell you, friend, that salvage wasn't happening. Not with the Queen's loot, anyhow. Our safe silence on board was interrupted by Creep's sudden screaming. Her feed began shaking and glitching, going from infrared to thermal until it completely blacked out. The sight of her through Peep's feed was indecipherable. We couldn't understand what was happening. Neither could Peep. At one point, she was jetting after her compatriot, or what she thought was a crazed-out Creep, deeper inside the ship. On the second, for she to turn as swiftly as possible in 0G and began searching for a way out. Her feed was darting from one collision hole to another, trying to remember which way they came through. "Stay with her, Peep! What the fuck is happening?" Bonnie was shouting on comms as Mila was trying to get their signals, shifting between thermal and ship location. "Where's Creep? Where is she?" Affirmative. Master thermal imaging engaged." Mila's jaw dropped. She pointed at her screen that was showing thermal imagery from inside the derelict. She couldn't speak. We all leaped to her position and gaped along. There was one tiny orange source of light in the shape of a human moving toward the hull with little red jet coming out of her arse. That was Peep as confirmed by her chip. And the other source of light.
Last call.
Aw, this early? I thought you Neptunians never slept.
Leave that and finish the damn story. What happened to Creep?
You got anything stronger than this garbage ale? If it's my last one, I want it to count.
One dark cosmonaut screwdriver coming right up.
Just don't make it too sour, eh? Extra olives.
Your story. Come on.
My story? Right. Creep. Well, the second source of light was, odd, to say the least, friend. Odd in a way that will make your blood curdle. If you're standing at a distance from it that isn't galaxies away. We didn't know what to make of it. And what was actually happening to Creep. That was her for sure. Chip beeping at the locator of the second light and all. Who else would it have been, right? Anyway, the source of light wasn't holding the shape of a human anymore. It wasn't holding any shape, actually. It looked rough. It sounded rough. At one point, Bonnie had to mute Creep's feed because we were all losing our minds listening to her howls. Sound glitching in and out. The second light looked like it was being emitted from a heat source that wasn't even organic. I don't know if... I don't know of anything that behaves in such a way in 0G. There was no signature from the jets, and Creep was just floating on one end of the ship, changing into, unimaginable forms with a speed that defied any movement humanly possible. Mr. Wayfinder speculated that something might have broken through her suit, and we were witnessing the gases escaping her body. No, Bonnie replied. I've seen that happen in thermal. Doesn't look like this. Mila gasped, and I realized that I'd been holding my breath for far too long. The young woman pointed to the other side of the screen. Jesus. Peep. We were so focused on the second light that none of us paid attention to the first one. The same thing was happening to her. She looked like a fiery mess splashed on one side of the screen. I couldn't believe that what I was looking at now was human-like just mere moments before. I'm going after them. No one could stop Bonnie. Mr. Wayfinder was telling her that it was insanity going out there after what we'd witnessed. Mila was begging her not to go alone, to take all precautions necessary. But I kept my mouth shut. I knew why she wanted to go out there. I knew it wasn't Peep and Creep she wanted to save. It was that longing that she needed to feed. God, crazy, stubborn bitch. Within an hour, the two lights had become a dull purple. They were still transforming into crazy shapes, with some ends turning bright red in a second, then turning blue, then back to purple. Spheres that burst into 1,000 little pieces that looked like shattered glass, all moving independently, then reintegrating into one single shape, all in a blink of an eye. By that point, Mr. Wayfinder and I were helping Mila and Bonnie get into their suits. Wait for me, Bonnie said as I was mounting the camera on the top of her visor. If there's anything left of you, I smirked at her. My comment didn't do anything to change her mind. She was ready to take this mystery head on. Mila wasn't. We could both hear Mr. Wayfinder trying to comfort her, explaining why it had to be her going and not him. I felt sorry for her. Honestly, I did, friend. I strapped an additional camera to Bonnie's chest and quickly checked if it connected to the Queen. Then I turned to Mr. Wayfinder. He gave me the all clear. We would now have 4 feeds instead of 2. One pair in infrared, the other in thermal. Moments later, the two of us were seeing Bonnie and Mila moving toward the same hole where the idiots had entered the wreck. I glanced at Peep's feed running on the side screen. It was still going. Image with no sound. Horror without explanation. She was still transforming into a million different purplish shapes in one corner of the master thermal image from the derelict. Until she wasn't. I peeked at the new feed coming from our second EVA team, then at Mr. Wayfinder. He wasn't paying attention to the side screen, so I quickly turned it off before I could see what I saw. Soon, though. Soon he would see. Peep's thermal image going on the main screen started resembling a human again. Barely human. One of her jets fired a bright red and then she floated away. We could both see her body drift out of the derelict, through a collision hole and into space. We said nothing to each other. He informed Bonnie of what had happened in his usual calm and stony manner, while I was gaping at the thermal image of Peep drifting away and out of sight. I couldn't see her from any of the Queen's portholes either. All I could think about was how grueling navigating her body back from between the asteroids was going to be.
We're in.
Bonnie sounded from the comms.
I'm still not picking up Creep's thermal. Any indication on a location that's changed? Location of chip unchanged. Thermal imaging not indicating biosignature.
Queenie responded. I think you should leave Mila at the opening so that she could fly out of there if something happens, I added.
Oh no. She insisted I shouldn't go alone. We're in this together, right, sweetie?
God, Bonnie was such a massive shit. But What goes around comes around, as they say. Mila squeaked a minuscule affirmation via comms. And in an instant, they were jetting together toward Creep's location. Much like Peep, the shapes in which Creep's thermal images was transmorgifying had stopped looking alien. It was a dark purple, almost indiscernible from the rest of the deep blue surrounding her inside the derelict. But the image held forms that both Mr. Wayfinder and I could finally decipher. Her body had limbs again, an elongated torso, and what looked like could have been a head on top of that. The body had moved from being a massive collection of blobs melted together at one point, only to shatter into countless pieces again until they reintegrated into a lean shape that looked deflated compared to that. My heart settled. I could understand that image. As horrific as it was, friend, at least I could understand it.
Have on my thermal.
Bonnie came in through the comms again.
We're moving closer.
I was glued to their infrared feeds. I wanted additional information to give more context for that purple and blue, gangly, humanish shape visible in the thermal feeds from the ship and the EVA team.
Oh, for fuck's sakes, Mila. You choke on your own vomit.
We all would have. Could you blame her? Even in the black and white of the infrared, Creep looked revolting. Less human than I expected, but close enough to make us all retch at the sight. So uncanny. Bonnie was closest to her, slowly navigating the jets on her suit for a steady approach toward the body. Mila's jets were blue. She was floating forward slowly by momentum from her previous fire only.
Poor Creep.
Yeah, poor Creep. Poor Mila and Bonnie, too. What happened next was even more gruesome than seeing Peep's feed before she vanished between the cosmic debris of the belt. The only indication that she was still out there was the beeping of her chip. Even Bonnie's breath was choppy. The woman that hunted beasts in the freezing seas of Jupiter's moon and fought off Phobosians for a piece of their culture was afraid. The captain that led her crew for a promise of loot into territories of the solar system so wretched and lawless that she became a legend herself was nervous to approach a corpse. Her feed started revealing more and more of the dreadful sight that was Creep. Pieces of torn suit floated around, illuminating the infrared for a second as they passed by Bonnie's visor, before she would swat them away from her field of view like fireflies in an Earth summer. Little bubbles of liquid would follow and smash into the camera's lens, sticking to it like they were made of toffee, obstructing our view from the safety of the Queen. Careful, Bonnie. I found myself pressing on the mic. Mr. Wayfinder was eyeing me curiously. Mila's thermal feed showed Bonnie's body glowing in orangish red, intensifying in redness as they made their approach. I think the girl had her comms off so we wouldn't hear her sobbing and retching. We still couldn't see Creep from her infrared since Bonnie's frame was completely obstructing our visibility from that angle.
Did you see that?
There was a sudden and short burst of yellow in the core of the purple, gangly corpse showing on the master thermal image. Queenie, biosignatures inside derelict? I hurried to ask.
2.
Of course, I thought.
3rd biosignature, faint. Detecting energy in biomass.
Biomass? I guess that was one way to put it. You have to love the bluntness of these AIs, right, friend?
She was still alive?
Shush you. Let me get to it. So, Mila's jets were switched back on, showing just a slightly warmer tinge of orange than the rest of her body. She was using them to hold herself in place. Brave enough not to speed away, but not to follow daftly after her captain. Suddenly, Creep's body began shining up yellow and orange in short bursts all over. The visual from Bonnie's visor infrared cam showed a brightly glowing figure in front of her. 2 dark shadows where eyes would have been, and one more for her mouth. How did she still have a face? How did she even look human, even slightly? The answer was that she didn't. It's a trick of the mind, friend. We were seeing for a moment what we wanted to see in those unnatural infrared and thermal images. Even Mr. Wayfinder couldn't escape the trap. Suddenly, the 3 dark shadows detached, like ghostly orbs from the place we saw as a face, until that point, and the illusion was broken. That wasn't a face on her head, or a torso attached to it. Nothing of limbs either. The 3 orbs looked magenta on thermal. They were the brightest colors there, overpowering the 2 orangish red human bodies, desperately flailing in 0G before the 2 of them could even think to flee. The process of transmogrification had begun. 4 feats. 4 feats, plus the master thermal, showing the most gruesome disembodiment you could imagine. 4 feats. The short leg before the feet reached us in the Queen gave me ample time to mute Bonnie's sound stream before we would even hear her screaming out for help. We saw her going first from Mila's feet, then Mila too on the master thermal. The bodies were being ripped to shreds, limb from limb, cell by cell, atom by atom. Shit. Then they were glued back together with speed and power faster than the eye could even perceive, faster than thoughts can form.
Biomass detecting low-level energy. Single biosignature detected in biomass.
Queenie was going in the background. The 2 of us sat watching it happen all over again. The thermal was bursting in yellow, orange, and red, then green into shapes that at this point looked like some strange alien fireworks on screen. I didn't know where Bonnie ended and Mila began, or if Creep's biomass was still part of what was happening anymore. Infrared wasn't of any help. I don't even have words to describe the forms that I saw on those 2 feet. I was just happy it was in black and white. I've seen a lot of things in my life, friend. But I didn't have the stomach for this. After a couple of hours, the fireworks subsided. The shapes had reintegrated into the deflated forms we mistakenly thought were human-like previously. They were purple and going dimmer by the minute. Colder, bluer. We sat there for many hours more, waiting to see how long the process would take, and what would actually happen to the bodies or the biomass that was split between 4 pieces, detecting as a single biosignature now. At one point I glanced down. 4 chips were blinking on the console in front of me. 4 purple, gangly frames were disintegrating again into blobs, with bursts of yellow light in their cores showing on the master thermal image. Then they would reintegrate. It happened over and over. The process stopped and began at regular intervals, then slowed down completely within 6 to 7 hours. 3 distinct corpses were showing inside the derelict, and 1 more in the middle of a dense field of space rock. Visible again on our master thermal, moving slowly but surely toward us. Mr. Wayfinder and I were still safe on board the Queen's loot. And eventually back here within a year or so.
That's it?
Yep.
And you escaped unscathed? Huh.
Mm-hmm.
Lucky you.
Uh-huh.
You didn't go inside Deathrock at all? Not carrying any alien plague, are you? I won't start changing something crazy when you leave, right?
I didn't have to go inside the derelict. Besides, look at me. Look closely. I'm perfectly human, aren't I?
You're not lying to me now, are you?
Would I lie to a friend?
You don't seem like the sort that has friends.
Believe what you want. Okay, I'm off to meet my buyers. They'll be expecting a full report on the new biotech I promised. I think they're going to like my show and tell. Wish me all the best, eh?
Welcome back to the Queen's Loot.
Queenie, establish a line with my partners from the Shadow Zone.
Affirmative.
The plan went as expected. Mission was successful, and the trial has exceeded expectations, as you will see for yourself in the presentation footage. Biotech has proven effective in the field to the level discussed previously. The possessed biomass reintegrated into human shape to a certain degree and responded sufficiently when controlled by the Master Command. The terrestrial biotech has been successfully weaponized to suit your current needs. Queenie, send a message with attachments.
Message forwarded. Awaiting response.
God damn, I'm so excited. We're gonna be rich.
Response received. Translation. We are impressed with the presentation. Our engineers can work with this level of reintegration. Consider the deal closed. You may collect your payment and bring the possessed bodies for further examination of the control and reintegration range.
Splendid. I have them right here. No one's gonna miss this lot back on Earth. See you in 6 months. Queenie, send response. Mr. Wayfinder, set a course to the 7th zone. You deserve as much of this booty as I do. Stellar work. I'm glad I could convince you to join my little endeavor. I always knew I could rely more on synths than on Earth Drek. And on that note, hear that, Bonnie? I guess your wish has come true. You're going to be part of my deal. In one shape or form. Hey, sci-fi horror fans. It's Teresa. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment. And remember, stay cosmic.